The massive crystal towers of Harmony's Prime shook as another red light appeared on the galactic map. Each red dot meant another dead world, another billion lives lost to the endless hunger of the KRL. Council leader Vethmar pressed his transparent hands against the control panel. His crystalline body flickered with worry as he watched the invasion spread across their peaceful territory like deadly fire. "How many this time?" he asked quietly. Minister Kolvas floated beside him, his gas-like form swirling with fear. 3 more systems in the outer rim. The colonies on Verdania lasted only 6 hours before going silent. The other council members gathered around the war room table. None of them had ever seen real combat. Their species had evolved beyond violence thousands of years ago. They built beautiful cities, created amazing art, and solved problems through science and discussion. War was something they only read about in ancient history books. But the KRYL were different. They were not like the peaceful races of the Confederation. The KRYL were machines with living parts, a hive mind that thought only of consuming and growing. They ate entire planets, turning rock and metal and flesh into more of themselves. "Our shield generators cannot stop them," reported General Zeth Cole of the Nebula Collective. His cloudy form pulsed with frustration. "They adapt to our weapons within minutes. Every defense we create they overcome." The Verdani representative, a tree-like being called Elder Rootsinger, spoke in his slow, deep voice. "My people tried to reason with them. We offered to share our knowledge, our resources. They consumed our diplomats along with everything else." Vethmar looked at the map again. Red lights were spreading faster now. At this rate, the KRYL would reach the core worlds within months. Billions more would die. "We have tried everything," he said to the council. "Our best scientists, our strongest defenses, our most advanced technology. Nothing works against them." "What about hiring mercenaries?" suggested Kolvas. "Surely there are warrior species somewhere in the galaxy who fight for payment." "We have contacted every known military force," replied General Zeth Cole. "The few who were willing to help were destroyed just as quickly as our own forces. The KRL learned from every battle." Elder Rootsinger's branches rustled with sadness. "Perhaps it is time to consider evacuation. We could flee to the outer rim beyond the galaxy's edge. And abandon our homes? Our history?" Vethmar's crystal body flashed with anger. "No. There must be another way." The council fell silent. Outside the great windows of the command center, they could see refugee ships arriving from the latest fallen worlds. Families who had lost everything, carrying only what they could grab before the KRL arrived. "Wait," said Minister Kolvas suddenly. "What about the unexplored regions? There are parts of the galaxy we have never visited." "Because they are too dangerous," General Zeth Cole pointed out. "The scout reports speak of death worlds, planets so hostile that nothing should be able to live there." "Exactly," Kolvas said, his form brightening with hope. "If something does live on such worlds, it would have to be incredibly strong to survive." Vethmar considered this. It was true that the Confederation had avoided many star systems because they seemed impossible to inhabit. Worlds with poisonous atmospheres, deadly radiation, or extreme temperatures. The peaceful races had no reason to visit such places. "It is a desperate plan," he admitted. "We would be gambling everything on finding someone, somewhere, who might help us." "We are already gambling everything," Elder Rootsinger pointed out. "The KRL will not stop until they have consumed the entire galaxy." The council voted quickly. There was no time for long debates or careful planning. They would send a distress signal into the unknown regions of space, hoping that somewhere in the darkness, someone would hear their call for help. The message was simple: help us. The KRYL are destroying everything. We will pay any price for military assistance. The signal traveled through space at the speed of light, carrying the hopes of trillions of beings. It passed dead systems and empty space, searching for any sign of intelligent life that might be able to fight where the Confederation had failed. Weeks passed. The KRYL continued their advance. More worlds fell silent. The refugee camps grew larger as more people fled their homes. Then, in a small corner of an unexplored spiral arm, the signal reached a blue and green world orbiting a yellow star. The planet looked beautiful from space, but the Confederation's computers would have marked it as a Class 12 death world if they had ever found it. This world had poisonous creatures, deadly weather, and life forms that killed each other constantly just to survive. It should have been empty, or filled only with simple, savage beasts. Instead, it was home to billions of beings who called themselves humans. At the Seoul Deep Space Station, Communications Officer Kim Dae-ho was monitoring the deep space frequencies when an unusual signal caught his attention. The transmission was clearly artificial, but unlike anything in Earth's databases. "Admiral Park Jun-woo, sir," he called across the control room. "I'm receiving what appears to be an alien distress call." Admiral Park, a veteran of Earth's resource wars, hurried over to examine the signal. The translation software was working overtime to decode the message, but the meaning was clear enough. Someone was asking for military help against an enemy called the KRYL. Park read the desperate plea and felt something familiar stir in his chest. He had seen that same desperation in the eyes of refugees during Earth's climate wars. The fear of people who had nowhere left to run. "Sir, what should we do?" asked Kim Dae-ho. Park looked at the message again, then at the star charts showing the location it came from. It was far away in a part of space Earth had never explored. But distance had never stopped humanity before. "Contact the Global Defense Council," he ordered. "Tell them Earth is going to war." The space around Harmony's Prime shimmered as dozens of strange ships appeared from hyperspace. The alien vessels looked nothing like the smooth, beautiful ships of the Confederation. These newcomers were dark gray and covered in scars, with sharp angles and weapon ports that looked ready for battle. Council leader Vethmar stared at the main screen in the command center. The ships were clearly built for war, not for the peaceful exploration his people preferred. Each vessel looked like it had been in many fights and survived them all. "Incoming transmission," announced the communications officer, his crystalline voice trembling slightly. The screen flickered, and suddenly Vethmar was looking at the most terrifying face he had ever seen. The creature had soft pink skin instead of crystal or gas, small dark eyes that seemed to see everything at once, and white teeth that looked designed for tearing flesh. "This is Admiral Lee Sung-min of the Earth Defense Fleet," the creature said in a calm voice. "We received your call for help." Vethmar tried to speak but could only stare. The being looked so primitive, so dangerous. Its eyes moved constantly as if looking for threats or planning attacks. When it spoke, those sharp teeth were clearly visible. "Welcome, Admiral Lee," Vethmar finally managed. We expected perhaps a small group of mercenary fighters?" Admiral Lee looked confused. "Small group? You asked for military assistance against something called the KRYL. You'll get the entire 7th Fleet. That's 42 ships and 15,000 soldiers. Plus 3 Marine divisions under General Choi Hyejin. When do we start fighting?" The other council members gasped. 15,000 warriors? The largest military force in the Confederation had maybe 100 guards, and they were mainly for ceremonial purposes. "Admiral," Vethmar said carefully, "we appreciate your enthusiasm. But perhaps we should discuss strategy first." "Good idea," Lee agreed. "General Choi will handle the briefing. She knows more about ground combat than I do." The first meeting between humans and the Confederation was held in the Great Crystal Hall of Harmony's Prime. Representatives from all the peaceful races gathered to meet their strange new allies. When the humans arrived, the aliens immediately noticed how they moved. Each step was careful and controlled, as if they expected an attack at any moment. Their eyes constantly scanned the room, noting exits and potential weapons. General Choi Hyejin was smaller than Admiral Lee but somehow even more frightening. She carried herself like a predator, and when she smiled, it looked more like a threat than a greeting. "Thank you for coming," she said to the assembled aliens. "Let's discuss how to kill the KRL." Minister Kolvass flickered nervously. "Kill? We were hoping to find a way to stop them, perhaps negotiate." "You can't negotiate with a hive mind that wants to eat you," Choi replied simply. "So we kill them all instead." Lieutenant Colonel Nam Soo-bin stepped forward carrying a metal case. The aliens watched nervously as she opened it and began removing various objects. "Standard human infantry equipment," she announced, holding up a small gray sphere. "This is a plasma grenade. When it explodes, it creates temperatures hot enough to melt steel within a 50-meter radius." Dr. Kethvar of the Zephyrians made a sound like breaking glass. "You give such terrible weapons to individual soldiers?" "Each of our soldiers carries 6 of these," Nam Soo-bin continued, pulling out more grenades. "Along with a pulse rifle, 2 sidearms, a combat knife, emergency medical supplies, and enough ammunition for a 3-day battle." "One soldier carries all of that?" asked Elder Rootsinger in amazement. "This is light equipment," Soo-bin explained. "Would you like to see our heavy weapons?" Before anyone could answer, she pulled out something that looked like a small cannon. "This is a portable rocket launcher. Effective against armored vehicles and small buildings." Several aliens fainted. The humans looked concerned. "Are they okay?" asked Captain COG-1. "Did we say something wrong?" General Choi gestured for her officers to continue. Colonel Yoon Minho activated a holographic display showing various battle scenarios. Standard human tactics, he began. Fighting in poisonous atmospheres, combat in zero gravity, boarding enemy ships while they're still shooting at you, and acceptable casualty rates for different mission types. Acceptable casualty rates? Whispered Council Leader Vethmar. You plan for your own people to die? Of course, Yoon replied matter-of-factly. In any battle, some people will be killed. We plan for this so we can still complete the mission. The aliens looked horrified. In their society, the loss of even one life was considered a tragedy that would be mourned for years. I don't understand, said Dr. Kethvar. How can you be so calm about death? Captain COG-1 stepped forward. She was younger than the other humans but had the same predator-like alertness in her eyes. On Earth, everything tries to kill you, she explained patiently. The weather, the animals, the plants, the bacteria, even other humans. We learned to kill them first or we would all be dead. Everything on your world is hostile? Asked Elder Rootsinger. Pretty much, CO replied. Poisonous spiders, diseases that melt your organs, storms that can level cities, predators that hunt in packs. Oh, and we fight wars against each other for practice. For practice? Vethmar could barely speak. How else would we learn to fight aliens? CO asked as if this made perfect sense. We've been killing each other for thousands of years. We're very good at it now. Admiral Lee stepped forward, sensing the aliens' distress. Look, we know this is difficult to understand. But you called for help against something that's destroying your civilization. We're here to help. We've been fighting things that want to kill us since we first stood upright on our home planet. The Care will adapt to any defense, Vethmar said weakly. They learn from every battle. General Choi smiled, and this time it looked genuinely happy instead of threatening. Perfect. So do we. The difference is we've had a lot more practice. The battle for Verdani Colony 7 started exactly like every other Confederation defeat. The beautiful crystal defense towers fired their energy beams at the approaching KRLL swarm, but the alien machines adapted quickly. Within minutes, their dark ships were ignoring the weapons that had worked just moments before. Commander Han Boare watched from the bridge of her assault cruiser as the Confederation forces began their usual retreat. The alien defenders moved in perfect formations, falling back in an orderly line as their shields failed one by one. Same as always, she muttered, checking her tactical display. The KRLL were advancing like a black tide, consuming everything in their path. Their harvester ships were already beginning to strip resources from the outer settlements. Ma'am, the Verdani ground forces are requesting immediate evacuation, reported her communications officer. Han nodded. The plant-like Verdani were peaceful beings who grew beautiful crystal gardens and created amazing art. They had never hurt anyone in their entire history. But they also had no idea how to fight back against something that wanted to destroy them. Sir, permission to engage? Major Kim Taejun's voice crackled over the comm from his assault transport. His ship was loaded with 200 Marines, all eager for their first real battle against the KRL. Han looked at the tactical screen one more time. 43 KRL ships against 12 human vessels. The Confederation would call these impossible odds and retreat immediately. All units, weapons free, she ordered. Show them how Earth does it. What happened next made the watching aliens think the humans had gone completely insane. Instead of forming defensive lines or trying to match the KRL's advanced tactics, the human ships scattered in all directions. Then they did something no civilized species would ever consider. They started ramming the enemy vessels. Fighter pilot Lieutenant Song Jae-wook dove his interceptor straight into the largest KRL harvester. At the last second, his ejection seat fired, launching him clear as his ship exploded against the alien hull. The blast tore a massive hole in the KRL vessel. Direct hit on target 7, Song reported calmly over the radio as his rescue beacon activated. Requesting pickup when convenient. The Verdani observer in the command center made a sound like rustling leaves. He deliberately crashed his ship into them? Standard ramming maneuver, explained Captain Lee Min-young, watching 3 more human fighters perform the same suicidal-looking attack. We've got plenty more ships. They take time to build new ones. The KRL swarm, which had been advancing in perfect coordination, suddenly faltered. Their hive mind was trying to process enemy behavior that made no logical sense. Why would a species destroy their own equipment as a weapon? Major Kim Taejun's assault transport punched through the hole in the harvester ship's hull. His Marines poured out into the alien vessel's corridors, immediately engaging the KRL drones that rushed to defend their ship. The fighting inside the harvester was brutal. The HFY had filled their ship with poisonous gases that would kill most species within minutes. The temperature was hot enough to cook flesh, and the air was full of toxic particles. Sergeant Lim DeYoung led her squad through the maze of metal corridors, her pulse rifle cutting down HFY drones with precise bursts of energy. When the weapon overheated after continuous firing, she did something that shocked the watching aliens. Instead of falling back to let the rifle cool down, she dropped it and drew a ceramic combat knife from her belt. The blade was only 20 centimeters long, designed for close combat when firearms failed. "Sergeant Lim, recommend you withdraw," Major Kim's voice came through her helmet radio. "Your sector is compromised." "Negative, sir," she replied, charging at the nearest HFY drone. The machine was twice her size and covered in armor plating, but she slammed into it with enough force to knock it backwards. The Verdani observer monitoring the battle could barely speak. "She's fighting without environmental protection. The atmosphere in that ship would kill our people in minutes." Lieutenant Park Hyun-woo, coordinating fire support from his position outside the harvester, glanced at the readouts showing the toxic conditions inside the alien ship. "Standard operating procedure," he said calmly, directing his squad's rocket launcher team to target another section of the ship. "Sergeant Lim spent 2 years fighting in the Amazon Preserve back on Earth. She's used to poisonous environments." "The Amazon Preserve?" the alien asked. "Death jungle," Park explained while calling in an artillery strike. "Everything there wants to kill you. Poisonous plants, venomous animals, diseases that can melt your internal organs, and weather that changes from flood to drought in hours. Great training ground." Inside the harvester ship, Sergeant Lim had reached the main control center. Her ceramic knife had cut through 3 HFY drones, and she was now facing a larger unit that looked like it might be important. The drone fired an energy beam that burned through her left shoulder, but instead of falling back, she used the wound to fuel her anger. Earth's evolutionary history had taught humans that injury often meant death was close, so the body's response was to fight harder, not give up. She threw her knife with deadly accuracy, the blade punching through the drone's optical sensor. While it was blind and confused, she pulled out her backup weapon, a simple steel crowbar, and began dismantling the machine piece by piece. The HFY hive mind, monitoring the battle through thousands of drones, experienced something it had never felt before: confusion. These humans became more dangerous when they were hurt, not less. Their tactics made no sense. They treated their own lives and equipment as expendable resources in ways that violated every logical combat doctrine. When Sergeant Lim finally destroyed the harvester's main computer core, the massive ship began to drift powerless through space. Her radio crackled with Major Kim's voice. "Good work, Sergeant. Medical team is on the way for that shoulder wound." "Just a scratch, sir," she replied, already looking for the next target. Ready for the next ship. The HFY swarm, for the first time in their species' history, began to hesitate. Their adaptive algorithms couldn't find patterns in human behavior because humans had evolved on a world where patterns meant death. Unpredictability was survival. Commander Han Boare watched her tactical display as more HFY ships began to drift powerless or explode under human attacks. The aliens had better technology and superior numbers, but they had never fought an enemy that considered death just another tactical option. "All units, continue engagement," she ordered. "Let's show these machines what happens when they threaten our friends." Deep in the heart of HFY territory, something impossible was happening. The hive mind, a collective intelligence that had consumed thousands of worlds without ever knowing defeat, was experiencing something new and terrifying: uncertainty. The data flowing through its networks made no sense. These humans fought in ways that violated every rule of survival the HFY had learned over millions of years. They entered toxic environments without protection. They continued fighting after receiving wounds that should have killed them. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to become more dangerous when they were losing. Commander Osei crouched behind a twisted piece of metal, studying the massive structure ahead of her. The HFY central processing node was the size of a small moon, its black surface covered in millions of glowing red lights. This was where the hive mind made its decisions, where it coordinated the destruction of entire civilizations. "Target confirmed," she whispered into her helmet radio. "Beginning infiltration." Her team of 12 Special Forces soldiers moved like shadows through the node's outer defenses. The HFY had never needed heavy security here because no enemy had ever penetrated this deep into their territory. That was about to change. The corridors inside the processing node were filled with poisonous gases that glowed green in the darkness. Radiation levels were so high that most species would die within minutes of exposure. The temperature was hot enough to cook flesh, and the air pressure was 3 times what most beings could survive. Just like the Chernobyl training grounds, Se-ri remarked to Corporal Young Woo-jin as they planted explosive charges along the main power conduits. Young nodded, his movements steady despite the deadly environment around them. Actually easier, ma'am. At least this place isn't snowing radioactive ash. The KRWL drones patrolling the corridors detected the intruders and moved to intercept. These were not the simple harvester machines the humans had fought before. These were warrior drones, built specifically for combat, with armor plating and energy weapons designed to kill anything that threatened the hive mind. The first drone appeared around a corner, its red optical sensors scanning for targets. It fired immediately, sending a beam of concentrated energy that would have vaporized most organic life forms. Young Woo-jin took the blast directly in his chest. The beam burned through his armor and into his ribs, leaving a smoking hole that should have killed him instantly. Instead, he raised his pulse rifle and emptied an entire magazine into the drone's head section. Corporal Young, report your status. Se-ri called as she engaged 2 more drones with her sidearm. Still breathing, ma'am, Young replied, pulling out a medical patch and slapping it over his wound. Might have a scar though. The KRWL drone's optical sensors flickered as it processed this impossible data. The human had suffered a lethal wound but was still fighting. Its combat algorithms had no response for an enemy that refused to die when killed. For the first time in the KRWL's existence, a local hive segment experienced hesitation. The drone actually stepped backwards, its targeting system confused by an opponent that didn't behave like any living creature it had ever encountered. Se-ri's team continued deeper into the processing node, leaving a trail of destroyed drones behind them. Each human fought with the desperate efficiency of someone who expected to die but refused to stop fighting until the job was done. Sergeant Kim Ho-jun held a corridor against 6 warrior drones while the demolitions team planted charges in the main reactor chamber. When his rifle ran out of ammunition, he switched to grenades. When those were gone, he drew his combat knife and charged the nearest machine. Sergeant Kim has been overrun, reported Lieutenant Yu Soo-young from her position near the reactor core. Sergeant Kim is fine, came Kim's voice over the radio, accompanied by the sound of metal being torn apart. Just having a conversation with some unfriendly robots. Miles away, in space above the processing node, Captain Shin Yi-na led a squadron of human interceptors against the KRYL defense fleet. What she saw made her smile inside her helmet. Command, this is Falcon Leader, she reported. 3 KRYL squadrons just changed course to avoid engagement. Repeat, the KRYL are running away. General Choi Hae-jin, monitoring the battle from her command ship, studied the tactical display with satisfaction. The red dots representing KRYL forces were indeed moving away from areas where human ships operated. Interesting, she murmured to her staff. They're learning. Learning what, General? Asked her aide. What every predator on Earth knows, Choi replied. Some prey fights back hard enough that it's not worth the cost of killing it. The KRYL hive mind was indeed learning, but the lesson was more disturbing than the general realized. The collective intelligence had begun to understand that these humans were not like other species it had encountered. Most creatures fought to defend territory, to protect their young, or to secure resources. They had logical reasons for violence and would retreat when those reasons no longer applied. Humans seemed to fight for different reasons. They fought because fighting was what they did. They had evolved on a world where everything was constantly trying to kill them, so violence was not a choice but a natural response to any threat. Back inside the processing node, Commander Se-ri's team had reached the central reactor chamber. The heart of the KRYL facility was a massive sphere of pulsing energy, surrounded by control systems that coordinated the hive mind's activities across multiple star systems. Charges are set, reported the demolition specialist. 30 seconds to detonation. All teams withdraw, Se-ri ordered, but she knew some of her people wouldn't make it out in time. That was acceptable. The mission was more important than any individual life. Corporal Young Woo-jin, still bleeding from his chest wound, stayed behind to hold the corridor while the others retreated. See you on the other side, ma'am, he said calmly. The explosion that destroyed the KRYL central processing node was visible from 3 star systems away. The blast severed the hive mind's connection to millions of drones and shut down coordinated attacks across dozens of worlds. But more importantly, it taught the KRYL something that would change the course of the war: fear. For the first time in their existence, they had encountered an enemy that could not be intimidated, could not be reasoned with, and could not be stopped by conventional means. The humans had brought something new to the galaxy, the concept of an enemy that would keep fighting until either they won or everything was dead. The KRLL Prime Nexus hung in space like a massive black star, its surface covered with billions of red lights that pulsed in perfect rhythm. This was the heart of the KRYLL Empire, the central brain that controlled every drone, every ship, and every decision across thousands of conquered worlds. Admiral Lee Sung-min stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the largest human fleet ever assembled prepare for the final battle. 200 ships surrounded the Nexus, carrying 50,000 soldiers who had traveled across the galaxy to end the KRYLL threat forever. All ships, this is Admiral Lee, he broadcast across the fleet. Today we end this war. Today we show the galaxy that some things are worth fighting for no matter the cost. The response came back from every ship captain, every squad leader, every individual soldier. Understood, sir. Ready to engage. The KRYL were ready too. Their greatest fortress bristled with weapons that could destroy entire planets. Thousands of drone fighters swarmed around it like angry insects. The hive mind had gathered every available unit to defend its most important facility. But the humans had learned something important during their months of fighting the KRYL. The aliens were used to enemies who fought logically, who retreated when faced with impossible odds, who valued their own lives above their mission objectives. Humans were different. They had spent thousands of years learning to fight against impossible odds. They had survived ice ages, plagues, wars, and natural disasters that should have destroyed them completely. Fighting hopeless battles was something they understood better than any other species in the galaxy. Begin assault pattern Omega, Admiral Lee ordered. All units, weapons free. What followed was not a battle in any conventional sense. It was a demonstration of what happened when an unstoppable force met an immovable object, and both sides refused to give up. Human ships drove directly into the KRYL defensive lines, ignoring the massive firepower directed against them. When their shields failed, they kept firing. When their weapons were destroyed, they rammed enemy vessels. When their ships were crippled, the crews abandoned them and continued fighting in small shuttles and even in spacesuits. Colonel Bae Jun Seo led the most dangerous mission of all, a direct assault on the Nexus Command Center. His Marines had to fight their way through corridors specifically designed to break the spirit of any invader. The KRYL had filled their fortress with psychological weapons. The walls showed images of every horrible death the hive mind had witnessed, every world they had consumed, every species they had destroyed. The air was filled with the screams of the dying and the sound of civilizations falling. Keep moving, Bae ordered his troops as they advanced through the nightmare corridors. Remember, they want us to be afraid. Don't give them the satisfaction. But the psychological warfare was having an effect on some of his younger soldiers. Private Lee Jin-ho was shaking as he saw images of Earth being consumed by KRYL swarms, his family and friends being turned into drone components. Sir, I can't. This is too much, he whispered, his rifle trembling in his hands. Sergeant Major Kim Yuri put her hand on his shoulder. She was a veteran of Earth's resource wars, a woman who had seen her own planet nearly destroy itself multiple times. You think this scares us? She laughed, looking at the horrific images surrounding them. I grew up in the Siberian reserves during the climate wars. My village was attacked by raiders twice a month. This is Tuesday for me. Her casual attitude toward the KRYL's most powerful psychological weapon spread through the squad. If Sergeant Major Kim could joke about it, then maybe it wasn't so scary after all. The hive mind, monitoring the human advance through millions of sensors, felt something it had never experienced before: despair. These creatures were not being broken by images of death and destruction. Instead, they seemed to be drawing strength from them. The collective intelligence tried to understand what it was seeing. Most species feared death and fought to avoid it. These humans seemed to expect death and fight harder because of it. They acted like beings who had already died and were now free to do whatever was necessary to complete their mission. Captain An Dong-hyuk reached the Nexus core with only 3 soldiers remaining from his original squad of 20. The chamber was the size of a cathedral, dominated by a pulsing sphere of energy that contained the KRYL hive mind's primary processing centers. KRYL warrior drones filled the chamber, their weapons trained on the small group of humans. But instead of attacking immediately, they hesitated. The local hive segments were confused by enemies who had fought through impossible odds to reach this place. Set the charges, An ordered calmly, as if he was discussing the weather instead of preparing to destroy the most powerful artificial intelligence in the galaxy. Sir, we won't have time to escape, pointed out Corporal Park Min-woo as he armed the nuclear explosive. I know, An replied. Make sure the timer is set correctly. We don't want to give them a chance to disarm it. The hive mind, watching this exchange, finally understood what it was facing. These humans were not fighting to survive. They were fighting to win, even if winning meant dying. They had come from a world so dangerous that death was just another obstacle to overcome. The nuclear explosion that destroyed the KRYL Prime Nexus lit up space like a newborn star. The blast was visible from 3 different star systems, a bright flash that marked the end of the greatest threat the galaxy had ever known. In the aftermath, as the human fleet regrouped and counted their losses, the surviving Confederation representatives approached Admiral Lee. "Admiral," said Council Leader Vethmar, his crystalline form flickering with gratitude and awe. "What payment do your people require for this service? We will give you anything: technology, resources, territory." Lee looked at the alien diplomat with tired eyes. Half his fleet was gone. Thousands of his people had died in the final assault. But they had completed their mission. "Just show us the way home," he said quietly. "Earth's got problems of its own to solve." As the human ships prepared to leave, new entries appeared in every galactic database. Earth's classification was quietly changed from Deathworld, avoid at all costs, to Deathworld, contact in case of extinction-level events. The humans had taught the galaxy something important. When everything else failed, when all hope was lost, when the impossible needed to be accomplished, there was one species that could be counted on to keep fighting until the job was done. They called themselves humans, and they came from a world where everything tried to kill them. Which meant they had spent their entire evolutionary history learning how to kill everything else first.